take for granted that information today comes at the speed of a tweet, from election results to the latest political scandals and business wheelings and dealings. Information and the speed at which you contain information plays a big role in the stock market, because investors are constantly reevaluating their investments based on new information. For example, following news of the September 11th terrorist attacks, stocks for airline companies such as American Airlines declined by 39%, while stocks for defense contractors shot up, as investors predicted a decline in air travel following the terrorist attacks and anticipated increased spending on national security. But information didn't always move so quickly in the investment community. The London Stock Exchange, one of the oldest modern stock exchanges, was founded in 1801, and at that time information traveled much slower. Letters, pamphlets, books, homing pigeons, and the newly invented optical telegraph, which used visual signals to transfer information one station at a time. This meant that it could take days for important events in Europe to reach the London Stock Exchange. Investors knew how important information was to their financial wheelings and dealings, and they had their ears to the ground, listening for any news that might impact their financial holdings. In 1814, there was no news more important to the London Stock Exchange than the fate of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was tearing through Europe at the time, extinguishing the Holy Roman Empire and marching towards Russia. Britain was spending a fortune both in terms of money and bodies in fighting Napoleon, so any news on the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars would ripple through the financial markets, sending financial holdings up or down. In February 1814, news of Napoleon's fate did arrive in Dover, Britain. A man in German military apparel stumbled through Packet Boat Pub, demanding writing paper. He declared that he had news of utmost importance and drafted a letter to be delivered to Admiral Thomas Foley, who was stationed at the Royal Marines. The letter proclaimed that Napoleon has been overtaken by a party of Sakin's Cossacks, who immediately slayed him and divided his body between them. The letter goes on to state that universal peace was imminent. The letter was signed R. Duaborg, Lieutenant Colonel. The letter was drafted and sent to Admiral Thomas Foley. The Lieutenant Colonel left the inn, declaring that the tyrant Bonaparte was dead. 3 French uniformed men could be heard declaring the end of Napoleon and the restoration of the Bourbon monarch across the London Bridge. News spread quickly to the London Stock Exchanges as news reporters quickly picked up on news of Napoleon's death, encouraged by the public's thirst for any information on the fate of Napoleonic Wars. Stocks and bonds soared on news of Napoleon's death and the ushering in of peace and stability. But viewers of this video who are a student of history probably knew that Napoleon wasn't killed in 1814 in the hands of Cossacks, who tore him from limb to limb. Nor was war over between France and Britain. Britain would have to wait till 1815 before the Duke of Wellington sunk Napoleon's European ambition, and 1821 before Napoleon succumbed to stomach cancer. The news of Napoleon's death by Lieutenant Colonel Borg was fake. Lieutenant Colonel Borg was in fact Captain Charles Berenger, a Prussian aristocrat who has fallen on hard times as his family fortunes evaporated when they sided with Britain during the Revolutionary War. As a result of Charles Berenger's financial difficulties, he served some time in prison for defaulting on some debts. Captain Charles Berenger not only spread the false news of Napoleon's demise in inns and bars, he also passed the false information to news reporters who were eager for any news on the war. The 3 uniformed men who could be heard speaking French proclaiming the death of Napoleon and the return of the Bourbon dynasty over London Bridge were also fake, hired to memorize the French phrases and to shout it throughout town. The false news had its desired effect as the price of omnium, a financial security that was a combination of various stocks and bonds used in government loans, rose from £27.5 when the London Stock Exchange opened to £30 by noon and peaked at £32.5. However, by day's end, the Admiralty refuted the news that Napoleon has been slain or that there's been peace in Europe. Investors and the public were outraged, as many bought into the stock rally based on the false information of Napoleon's demise that was widely circulated. The London Stock Exchange was a relatively new institution, and it was already being attacked as a place of gamblers and men of ill repute, scheming and scamming. So the London Stock Exchange launched an investigation in order to preserve its image as an institution for the good in both financing government debt and providing capital to new companies and industries. The London Stock Exchange investigation pointed directly to Lord Thomas Cochrane, who was highly leveraged in speculating in omnium. Had the price of omnium not reached its heights on that fateful day, he stood to lose £10,000, or roughly $1 million USD in today's dollars. Suspiciously, Lord Thomas Cochrane's uncle and stockbroker also sold a large amount of omnium during that day, £510,000 and £392,000. Lord Thomas Cochrane was an admiral of some fame. He once launched an exploding ship containing 15 barrels of gunpowder, several hundred shells, and thousands of hand grenades at a French fleet. Lord Thomas Cochrane was also a representative of Parliament for the city of Westminster. However, Lord Thomas Cochrane didn't have the wealth to match his bravado, as his father dwindled the family fortunes to nothingness and left the family with a bundle of debt. The London Stock Exchange believed they found their man and began to place placards around town denouncing Lord Cochrane for stock manipulation. Lord Cochrane wasn't one to take things sitting down. He began to publish affidavits in newspapers defending his reputation. The two sides were destined to meet in court to protect their respective reputations. The trial began on June 8, 1814, and Judge Baron Ellenborough presided over the case. This was a case that was watched by many influential legal professionals, as it would provide some legal framework on how financial manipulation would be prosecuted. Surprisingly, Lord Cochrane himself didn't attend the trial in person to defend his reputation. Rather, he provided a sworn affidavit stating his innocence. The defense positioned Lord Cochrane as a Navy war hero of the highest order, who served his country honorably in both a military capacity and as a representative of Parliament. Lord Cochrane was a gentleman, the defense posited, who wouldn't engage in such lowly acts as stock speculation or manipulation. The prosecutors were quick to point out that Lord Cochrane himself didn't appear at the trial to give a testimony, which if he was caught lying during his testimony, could be charged with perjury. Rather, he just submitted a voluntary affidavit that could not be charged with perjury. During the trial, damning evidence against Lord Cochrane surfaced. Captain Charles Behringer, the individual who started the rumors in the inns and bars by presenting himself as a German military personnel, was linked to Lord Cochrane when he boasted to former British military officers that he would be receiving ample rewards for helping Lord Cochrane in the stock market. The three uniformed men that were seen spouting French, declaring the death of Napoleon, also confessed that they were hired to spread rumors of Napoleon's demise. The prosecutor also pointed out that Lord Cochrane was not investing in the stock market, a noble pursuit, but rather he was using leverage to speculate in the market, an important distinction as one can be seen as a noble pursuit while the other one is seen as a low and dishonest endeavor. The prosecutors painted Lord Cochrane as a noble civil servant and war hero who was caught up and warped by the evils of speculation, who was forced to act immorally to cover his wild speculations. The jury only needed 2.5 hours to return a guilty verdict. Lord Thomas Cochrane was sentenced to 12 months in prison and fined £1,000. Stripped of his knighthood, and before the trial even began, he was dismissed from Tonnant, the ship that he was serving as flag captain. With that concludes one of the very first trials of stock manipulation at a major stock exchange, but it definitely wasn't the last. The London Exchange managed to defend its reputation, and it grew in importance not only as a financial center for Britain, but for the world. Lord Thomas Cochrane did rebound after serving his time in prison. He was reinstated in the Navy after serving his stint in prison and was fighting against the Spanish Navy in Latin America, where he was known as El Diablo Cochrane. He would also regain his knighthood and retain his father's title and become the 10th Earl of Dundonald.